The trading post on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual mix of alien voices and mechanical sounds. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked through the crowded marketplace, her simple brown jacket marking her as human among the more colorful beings around her. She carried a worn leather bag filled with soil samples and artifact fragments from her latest dig. Most aliens barely noticed her. To them, humans were just another young species trying to make their way in the galaxy. The Vorac, tall, crystalline, beings who sparkled like living diamonds, looked down on humans with their ancient eyes. They had been traveling between stars for 2 million years, they claimed. The Luminari, creatures made of pure energy that floated in containment suits, considered themselves even older. Next to such ancient races, humanity's 10,000-year history seemed like yesterday. Elena didn't mind being ignored. It made her work easier. She stopped at a small stall run by a four-armed Tessarian merchant. His blue skin gleamed under the station's artificial lights as he sorted through various artifacts and curiosities from across the galaxy. "Looking for anything special today, human?" the merchant asked without much interest. His species had been spacefaring for 50,000 years, which made them practically children compared to the truly ancient races, but still far older than humans. "Just browsing," Elena replied, examining a small carved stone. The symbols on it looked familiar, though she couldn't place where she had seen them before. "How much for this one?" 5 credits. It's from the old Vorac ruins on Crystalla Prime. Nothing important, just decoration. Elena paid for the stone and slipped it into her bag. Everything was nothing important when humans were involved. The galaxy's older species treated human interest in archaeology like a child's fascination with shiny objects. 3 hours later, Elena sat in her small ship heading toward Earth. The journey would take 4 days through hyperspace, giving her time to study her new finds. She spread her collection across the ship's small table and began cataloging each piece. The carved stone from the Tessarian merchant caught her attention again. The symbols were definitely familiar. She pulled out her portable scanner and ran a detailed analysis. The stone was old, perhaps 60,000 years, but the symbols— Elena frowned and checked her files. She had seen these exact same markings in caves on Earth in the deepest levels that most archaeologists never bothered to explore. But that was impossible. The markings on Earth were supposed to be much newer, maybe 5,000 years old at most. She made a note to investigate further when she reached home. Earth looked peaceful from orbit, a blue and green marble spinning, slowly in space. Most aliens who visited called it a garden world and assumed humans were simple farmers and miners who had barely begun to explore space. They weren't entirely wrong. Most human worlds were agricultural or industrial, nothing like the massive city planets or energy constructs of the older races. Elena's ship landed at the small spaceport outside New Geneva, where the Human Archaeological Institute had its headquarters. The building was modest compared to the crystal palaces of the Vorac or the floating cities of the Luminari. It was just concrete and steel, built to last but not to impress. Dr. Marcus Chen, her research partner, met her in the lab. He was a thin man with graying hair who had spent most of his life studying human history. Like Elena, he specialized in the earliest periods of human civilization, the times before written records when humans had supposedly lived in caves and barely knew how to make fire. "Find anything interesting?" Marcus asked as Elena unpacked. "Her samples? Maybe. Look at this." She showed him the carved stone. The merchant said it came from old Vorac ruins, 60,000 years old. Marcus examined the stone under a magnifying lens. "These symbols, I've seen them before." "That's what I thought. The Patterson Cave System, Level 7. "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The Patterson Caves are maybe 5,000 years old, human cave paintings." Elena pulled up files on her computer, showing side-by-side images of the stone and cave paintings from Earth. The symbols were identical, down to the smallest details. Either humans visited Crystalla Prime 60,000 years ago, Elena said, or the Vorac visited Earth 5,000 years ago and copied ancient human art. Both possibilities seemed ridiculous. Humans had only developed space travel 300 years ago, and the Vorac claimed they had never been to Earth before first contact 50 years ago. Over the next week, Elena and Marcus dove deeper into their archives. The Human Archaeological Institute had been collecting artifacts and data for centuries, most of it dismissed by other species as the work of primitives. But patterns began to emerge when they looked carefully. Mathematical constants, carved into stone on a dozen different worlds, all matching symbols found in Earth's oldest caves. Star charts that showed Earth marked with symbols meaning home or origin in languages supposedly older than humanity. Stories from across the galaxy about mysterious teachers who had appeared in ancient times, bringing knowledge of fire and farming and the stars. "Look at this," Marcus said one evening, projecting a hologram of an ancient Tessarian temple. "The proportions, the architectural style, it's almost identical to the megalithic structures we found in Northern Europe." Elena studied the image. The Tessarian temple was supposed to be 40,000 years old, built when their civilization was young. The European megaliths were thought to be maybe 6,000 years old. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "I've been analyzing the linguistic patterns in these ancient alien texts. The root structures, the way concepts are organized. They're all similar to ancient human languages, but not modern ones. They match the language patterns we find in our oldest myths and legends." Elena sat back in her chair. The implications were staggering, but also impossible to believe. "Are you suggesting that humans somehow influenced the development of alien civilizations? That we were involved in galactic history before we officially discovered space travel?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Marcus replied. "But the evidence is pointing in directions that don't make sense." They worked through the night, cross-referencing data from dozens of worlds. Every ancient civilization in their sector of the galaxy showed signs of human influence, but always in the deepest, oldest layers that other archaeologists rarely studied. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ambassador Kethavar of the Vorac delegation arrived at the Institute, his crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the walls as he moved. "Dr. Vasquez," he said in his melodious voice, "I understand you have been asking questions about ancient Vorac sites." Elena exchanged glances with Marcus. News traveled fast in diplomatic circles. "Just routine research, Ambassador," she replied. "Comparative archaeology across species." "Of course. However, I must inform you that many of our oldest sites are restricted. They contain sacred artifacts and information that outsiders would not understand. Perhaps your time would be better spent studying human history." The suggestion was polite, but firm. Elena nodded and thanked the ambassador, but she noticed something interesting. When Kethavar looked at the images on their computer screens, his crystalline form flickered slightly, a sign of surprise or confusion in Vorac body language. After the ambassador left, Elena made a decision. "I need to get access to those restricted sites." "The Vorac will never allow it," Marcus said. "Then I won't ask permission." Elena spent the next month preparing. She arranged to join a routine archaeological survey mission to the Andromeda sector, where several species had ancient sites under study. The survey was led by Dr. Ralteth, a respected luminary scholar who had worked with humans before and found them useful for detail work. The mission would visit 6 worlds over 3 months, documenting artifacts and taking samples. Elena volunteered for the most tedious assignments, cataloging routine finds and cleaning excavation sites. It was exactly the kind of work that older species expected from humans. But Elena had a different plan. 3 weeks into the mission, they arrived at Vorac Prime, the crystalline homeworld where the Vorac species had first evolved. The planet's surface sparkled like a giant gemstone covered in crystal formations that served as both natural landscape and ancient architecture. The official excavation sites were in the newer layers, only about 1 million years old, but Elena had studied orbital surveys and identified older formations deeper underground, areas that the Vorac considered too sacred to disturb. On the third night, while the rest of the team slept, Elena slipped away from the camp. She carried minimal equipment, just a scanner, sample containers, and a small excavation laser. The restricted site was 5 kilometers away, hidden beneath layers of crystal growth. The entrance was almost impossible to find, just a narrow gap between crystal formations that led downward into darkness. Elena squeezed through the opening and found herself in a vast underground chamber. Her light revealed walls covered in symbols and carvings, far more elaborate than anything in the official sites. But what stopped her cold was the style of the artwork. It was human, not similar to human art, not influenced by human culture. It was definitely, unmistakably, human in origin. The proportions, the artistic techniques, the way figures were represented, everything matched the oldest cave paintings on Earth. Elena scanned the walls frantically, taking detailed images and measurements. The symbols were the same ones she had found across a dozen worlds, but here they were part of larger compositions that told stories. Stories about teachers who came from the stars. Stories about a great conflict that threatened all life. Stories about a sacrifice that saved the galaxy, but came at a terrible cost. In the center of the chamber stood a crystalline structure that looked like an altar or control panel. When Elena approached it, her scanner detected complex electronic patterns within the crystal matrix. It was still active after all these years. She touched the crystal surface, and suddenly the chamber filled with light. Holographic images appeared around her, showing star maps and alien worlds and creatures she had never seen before. And moving. Through all of these images were humans, but not the humans of today. These humans wore clothing made of energy and light. They shaped matter with their thoughts and traveled between stars without ships. They were teachers and guardians and warriors, protecting younger species from threats beyond imagination. Elena stared at the images, her mind reeling. According to the holograms, this chamber was nearly 3 million years old, but that was impossible. Humans had only existed as a spacefaring species for a few centuries. Unless they hadn't. Unless everything the galaxy knew about human history was wrong. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the entrance tunnel. Elena quickly gathered her samples and data, then shut down the crystal display. She had to get back to camp before anyone discovered she was missing. But as she climbed toward the surface, one thought kept repeating in her mind. What if humans weren't the youngest species in the galaxy? What if they were the oldest? And what if something had happened to make everyone, including humans themselves, forget the truth? Elena barely slept for the rest of the mission. Every night she reviewed the images and data from the hidden chamber on Vorac Prime. The holographic displays had shown her things that challenged everything she thought she knew about galactic history. When the survey mission finally returned to Earth, Elena went straight to Marcus with her findings. They locked themselves in the Institute's most secure lab and began analyzing the data. "This can't be right," Marcus said, staring at the holographic recordings Elena had captured. "These images show humans with technology far beyond what we have today, and the dating puts this chamber at 3 million years old." "I know it sounds impossible," Elena replied, "but look at the evidence, the artistic style, the symbolic language, even the way the figures move in the holograms. It's distinctly human." Marcus pulled up comparative files on his computer. "The mathematical sequences in these star charts match calculations we use today for hyperspace navigation. But according to official history, humans only discovered hyperspace, travel 3 centuries ago." Elena pointed to specific symbols in the chamber recordings. These aren't just decorations, they're instructions, navigation routes, technical specifications, even what looks like biological data about various alien species. Over the following weeks, they worked to decode more of the information from the crystal chamber. The symbols formed a complex language that seemed to be an ancient form of human writing, but far more sophisticated than anything in Earth's historical records. Slowly, a story began to emerge. According to the crystal records, humans had once been the dominant species in this region of the galaxy. They had guided the development of younger civilizations, teaching them technology and helping them spread among the stars. The Vorac, Luminari, Tessarians, and dozens of other species had all received help from these ancient humans. But something had gone wrong. The record spoke of a great threat from beyond the galaxy, something that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very fabric of space and time itself. The ancient humans had fought this threat, but the cost of victory had been enormous. "Look at this section," Marcus said, highlighting a series of symbols. "It talks about a choice. The humans could defeat the enemy, but only by sacrificing their own civilization. They chose to save the galaxy and accept the consequences." Elena studied the passage. "What kind of consequences?" "Memory loss, technological regression, the scattering of their people across space and time." Marcus paused. "It's like they deliberately erased their own history to save everyone else." The implications were staggering. If the records were accurate, modern humanity wasn't a young species learning to explore space. They were the descendants of an ancient civilization that had chosen to forget its own greatness. Elena decided they needed more evidence. She applied for research grants to visit other worlds, claiming she was studying comparative mythology across species. The grants were approved easily. Human requests for academic funding were rarely taken seriously by galactic authorities. Her first stop was Lumina, the energy-being homeworld of the Luminari. The planet was a swirling mass of controlled plasma and electromagnetic fields, beautiful but deadly to most organic life. Elena wore a full environmental suit as she explored the ancient archives. The Luminari had excellent records going back 800,000 years. According to their historians, their species had evolved naturally from electromagnetic phenomena in their star system. But Elena found inconsistencies in their earliest records. References to the teachers who had helped them achieve consciousness, descriptions of how they had learned to control their energy forms, technical specifications for their first containment suits that matched human engineering principles. More importantly, she found physical evidence. In the deepest parts of their archives, the Luminari had preserved artifacts from their earliest period. Among them was a small device that Elena's scanner identified as human in origin, though supposedly 800,000 years old. Her next stop was Tessara, homeworld of the four-armed blue-skinned traders. The Tessarians were proud of their 50,000-year history and their natural talent for commerce and exploration, but their oldest myths told stories that didn't match their official history, tales of visitors who had taught them to read the stars, legends about beings who had shown them how to build their first starships, stories about a great war that had shaken the galaxy and the mysterious guardians who had sacrificed everything to protect the younger races. Elena found similar patterns on every world she visited. Each species had ancient legends about mysterious teachers or guardians. Each had unexplained gaps in their earliest historical records, and each had artifacts or architectural elements that showed unmistakable human influence. The evidence was overwhelming, but Elena knew that no one would believe her without absolute proof. She needed to find something that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kim was a linguist who specialized in ancient languages and communication patterns. Elena had worked with her before on translation projects. When Elena showed her samples of the symbolic language from various worlds, Sarah became very excited. These aren't just similar to ancient human languages, Sarah explained. They are ancient human languages, but they're versions of human languages that don't exist in our historical records. What do you mean? Elena asked. Look at the grammatical structures, the way concepts are organized, the logical flow of ideas. This is definitely human thought patterns, but it's more sophisticated than any human language we know about. It's like finding a library written in advanced English from a time before English was supposed to exist. Sarah's analysis provided the missing piece of Elena's theory. The ancient symbols weren't just influenced by human culture. They were actually created by humans, but humans with a level of linguistic sophistication that exceeded modern capabilities. Elena decided to take the biggest risk of her career. She applied for permission to excavate in the deepest levels of Earth's oldest archaeological sites. Most human historians avoided these areas because they predated known civilizations and seemed to contain only random artifacts. The permissions were granted easily. After all, what harm could come from letting humans dig around in their own backyard? Elena assembled a small team of trusted researchers and headed to the Drakensberg Mountains in southern Africa, where some of Earth's oldest caves contained layers of artifacts going back hundreds of thousands of years. Most archaeologists had studied only the upper levels of these caves, which contained the expected progression of human development from simple stone tools to more sophisticated technologies. But Elena wanted to go deeper, to the levels that predated known human history. What they found changed everything. In the deepest chambers, more than 200 meters underground, Elena's team discovered a vast complex of rooms and tunnels carved from solid rock. The workmanship was incredible, with smooth walls and precise angles that would challenge modern engineering capabilities. The chambers were filled with artifacts that defied explanation, devices made from materials that their scanners couldn't identify. Star charts carved into the walls that showed not just local star systems, but galaxies millions of light years away. And everywhere the same symbolic language that Elena had found across the galaxy. In the largest chamber, they found something that stopped Elena cold. It was a massive crystal structure, similar to the one she had discovered on Vorac Prime, but much larger and more complex. When she approached it, the crystal began to glow with an inner light. Suddenly, the chamber filled with holographic displays showing Earth's true history. Images of ancient human cities that floated in the sky, powered by technology that manipulated gravity and space itself. Scenes of humans traveling between stars, not in ships, but by stepping through doorways that opened directly onto distant worlds. Records of human explorers seeding life on barren planets and guiding the evolution of primitive species into civilization. And then, the war. The holograms showed something emerging from the dark spaces between galaxies. Entities that weren't quite matter and weren't quite energy, but something else entirely. They consumed everything they touched, not just destroying it, but erasing it from existence itself. Elena watched in fascination and horror as the ancient humans fought this threat. They used weapons that rewrote the laws of physics and defenses, that turned space itself into a shield. But the enemy was too powerful, too alien, too fundamentally wrong for normal warfare to defeat. The final scenes showed the ultimate sacrifice. To defeat the entities, the humans had to do something that would erase their own civilization from history. They scattered their people across time and space, wiped their own memories, and destroyed all records of their existence. Only automated systems and hidden archives would remember the truth. The galaxy would forget that humans had ever been its guardians. Humans themselves would forget their true nature. They would become a young, primitive species, starting over from nothing. But they would survive, and if the threat ever returned, the hidden systems would reactivate, and humanity would remember who they really were. The holographic display ended, leaving Elena and her team in stunned silence. "My God, whispered Dr. Chen, who had insisted on joining the expedition despite his age. "We weren't the youngest species in the galaxy. We were the first." Elena stared at the crystal, her mind racing with the implications. Everything made sense now. The human influence on ancient alien civilizations, the gaps in galactic history, the way older species seemed to instinctively respect humans, despite considering them primitive. Deep down, they remembered. They might not know why, but something in their genetic memory recognized humanity as their ancient protectors. Elena began to understand the weight of what they had discovered. Humans weren't just another species trying to find their place in the galaxy. They were the ones who had created that galaxy, who had guided it, who had sacrificed everything to protect it. And according to the crystal records, the threat that had forced that sacrifice was still out there, somewhere in the dark spaces between stars. Elena looked at her team, seeing the same realization dawning in their eyes. They weren't just archaeologists anymore. They were the keepers of humanity's greatest secret. The question was, what were they going to do with it? As if in response to her thoughts, the crystal pulsed with light, and new symbols appeared on its surface. Elena's scanner translated them automatically. Deep space monitoring stations detecting anomalous signals. Recommended action, begin awakening protocols. Elena's blood ran cold. Whatever was coming, the ancient warning systems were already responding to it. Humanity's long sleep was about to end. Elena stared at the warning message glowing on the crystal surface. The translation was clear, but the implications were terrifying. Something was triggering the ancient monitoring systems that had been dormant for millions of years. She turned to her team. "We need to access the full archives. If these warnings are real, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "The question is, how much can we handle?" The last holographic display almost overwhelmed our minds with information. This could be beyond human comprehension. "We have to try," Elena replied. "If the ancient humans left these systems active, they must have believed their descendants could eventually understand them." Elena approached the crystal carefully and placed her hand on its surface. The chamber filled with light as new holographic displays materialized around them. This time, the information came in waves that were easier to process. The crystal seemed to sense their capacity and adjusted its output accordingly. The first wave showed Earth as it had been millions of years ago, not the primitive world that galactic historians described, but a planet covered with cities that defied physics, structures that floated without support, powered by energy drawn from the fabric of space itself, transportation networks that moved people instantly across continents, gardens that grew in patterns that created art visible from orbit. Humans in those days had been far more than they were now. The holograms showed people who could manipulate matter with their thoughts, who lived for thousands of years, who could step between dimensions as easily as walking through a door. "This is what we were," Elena whispered. "This is what we gave up." The second wave revealed the scope of humanity's ancient civilization. They hadn't just lived on Earth. They had spread across the entire galaxy, but not as conquerors. They had been gardeners, carefully nurturing young species and guiding their development. The Vorac had been simple crystal formations before humans taught them consciousness. The Luminari had been random energy patterns before humans showed them how to think. Dozens of species owed their existence to human intervention, but humanity's greatest achievement had been the web. The hologram showed a vast network of interconnected systems spanning the galaxy. Every star, every planet, every space between worlds was monitored and protected by devices that operated beyond normal space-time. The web maintained the laws of physics, prevented cosmic disasters, and kept the galaxy safe from threats that existed outside reality itself. Elena realized that this was why the galaxy seemed so stable, so perfect for life. It wasn't natural. It was designed. Humans had literally rebuilt their corner of the universe to create a safe haven for younger species. The third wave showed the enemy. The Devourers came from the spaces between galaxies, from regions where the normal laws of reality didn't apply. They weren't alive in any sense that humans understood, but they weren't dead either. They were something else, something that existed by unmaking everything around them. When they touched a star, the star didn't just die, it ceased to have, ever existed. When they consumed a planet, they erased it from history so completely that no one could remember it had ever been there. They were entropy given purpose, the end of all things made manifest. Elena watched in horror as the holograms showed entire star systems disappearing, not just destroyed but edited out of existence. The Devourers moved slowly but inexorably, consuming reality itself as they advanced toward the galactic core. "How do you fight something like that?" Dr. Chen asked. The fourth wave provided the answer, and Elena almost wished it hadn't. To defeat the Devourers, humans had been forced to become something like them. They had developed weapons that operated outside normal space-time, defenses that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They had learned to rewrite the fundamental constants of reality and to exist partially outside the universe itself. The war had lasted for millennia, fought across dimensions that ordinary minds couldn't perceive. Gradually, humanity had pushed the Devourers back, forcing them into the deep void between galaxies. But the cost had been enormous. Using such power had changed humanity at a fundamental level. They were no longer entirely part of the universe they were trying to protect. Their children were born with abilities that grew stronger with each generation until they risked becoming as alien as the entities they fought. Worse, the weapons they had created to fight the Devourers were themselves dangerous. Left active, they would eventually tear apart the fabric of space-time, destroying the galaxy they had saved. Humanity faced an impossible choice: remain as they were and watch their descendants become monsters, or find another way to preserve the galaxy's future. The final wave showed humanity's solution. They called it the long sleep. Using technology that made their wartime achievements look primitive, humanity had rewritten their own history. They scattered their people across time and space, erasing their memories and reducing their abilities to normal human levels. The great cities were dismantled. The web was automated and hidden. All records of their true nature were destroyed, or buried so deep that only desperate circumstances would reveal them. Humanity would become a young, primitive species, starting over from nothing. They would rediscover space travel, rebuild their civilization, and spread across the galaxy again. But this time as normal beings, not as gods. The older species would forget that humans had ever been anything more than another young race. Their genetic memory would retain only a vague sense of respect and protectiveness toward humanity, ensuring they would be welcomed as they rebuilt. And if the Devourers ever returned, hidden systems would detect them and begin the awakening process. Humanity would gradually remember who they really were and reclaim their true power. Elena staggered as the holographic display ended. The weight of what she had learned was almost unbearable. Humanity hadn't just been the first intelligent species in the galaxy. They had been its creators and protectors for millions of years. Every human alive was a descendant of beings who had wielded power beyond imagination and given it up to save the universe. They had chosen to become ordinary, vulnerable, mortal, not out of weakness, but as the ultimate act of love for the species they had created. "The monitoring stations," Elena said slowly. "They're detecting the Devourers' return." Dr. Chen pulled up the translation again. "Deep space monitoring stations detecting anomalous signals. How long do we have?" Elena interfaced with the crystal again, asking for more specific information. The response chilled her to the bone. The Devourers were already at the galaxy's edge, moving slowly but steadily inward. At their current rate of advance, they would reach inhabited systems within 50 years. 50 years to prepare for a war against entities that could erase entire star systems from existence. Elena looked around the chamber, taking in the incredible technology that surrounded them. "The awakening protocols," she said. "How do they work?" The crystal responded with another wave of information. The process was gradual and carefully controlled. Humans across the galaxy would begin experiencing dreams and visions that slowly restored their genetic memories. Advanced technologies would start functioning again as human consciousness expanded to operate them. Hidden facilities would come online, revealing the tools needed to fight the coming war. But the process would take time. Full awakening could take decades, and they might not have that long. "There has to be a way to accelerate it," Elena said. The crystal showed her the answer, and she gasped. There were key nodes scattered across human space, ancient facilities that could trigger rapid awakening in local populations. But activating them required someone who already understood the truth. Someone like her. "We have to warn everyone," Dr. Chen said. Elena shook her head. "Who would believe us? We need proof, and we need to start the awakening process carefully. If we do this wrong, we could cause panic or make the process fail." She studied the star. Charts the crystal was showing her. There were 12 key nodes within human space, hidden on colony worlds that most people considered unremarkable. Each node could awaken the human population within a radius of several light years. "We need to split up," Elena decided. "Each of us takes responsibility for activating specific nodes. We document everything, gather evidence, and start the process, slowly." Over the next several hours, they planned their approach. Elena would take the nodes closest to Earth and the core human worlds. Dr. Chen would head toward the outer colonies. Other team members would handle the scattered systems throughout human space. They spent days learning how to interface with the ancient systems, practicing with the crystal until they could activate dormant technologies without causing catastrophic failures. The process was like learning to use muscles they didn't know they had. Elena discovered that the awakening process wasn't just about recovering memories. It was about reclaiming abilities that humanity had deliberately suppressed. As Bets, she worked with the crystal. She found herself understanding concepts that should have been beyond human comprehension. Her perception of space and time began to expand, allowing her to see patterns and connections that had been invisible before. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. "Is this what we were like?" she asked the crystal during one training session. The response came not as words, but as a direct understanding. "This is what you will be again." Elena realized that she and her team were becoming the first humans in millions of years to reclaim their true nature. They were no longer quite the same species they had been when they entered the chamber. On their final day in the hidden complex, Elena made a discovery that changed everything. In the deepest part of the archives, she found records of other galaxies, where humanity had fought the Devourers. They had lost some of those battles. The records showed dead galaxies, vast regions of space where reality itself had been consumed. In some cases, humanity had managed to evacuate surviving species to other galaxies before the end. In others, everything had been lost. But in every case, humanity had learned something new about their enemy. The collective knowledge of millions of years of warfare was stored in the archives, waiting to be accessed when the next battle began. Elena understood now why the ancient humans had been so confident that their descendants could eventually win. They weren't just fighting the Devourers. They were part of a war that spanned multiple galaxies and eons of time. Humanity wasn't just the galaxy's ancient protectors. They were the universe's immune system, the one force capable of stopping entropy made manifest. As Elena prepared to leave the chamber and begin activating the awakening nodes, she felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just an archaeologist investigating ancient mysteries. She was a general in a war that would determine whether reality itself would survive. The crystal pulsed one final time, downloading the last piece of critical information directly into her mind. The location of humanity's greatest weapon, hidden in a place where no one would think to look for it, Earth itself. The planet wasn't just humanity's birth world. It was the control center for the entire galactic defense network, disguised as a simple agricultural world. When the time came for the final battle, Earth would reveal its true nature. Elena smiled grimly as she led her team toward the surface. The galaxy thought humans were a young, primitive species barely worth noticing. They had no idea what was about to wake up. Elena's ship emerged from hyperspace near Kepler Station, the same trading post where her journey had begun 6 months ago. But everything was different now. She could see the station's true nature, not just a simple marketplace, but a carefully positioned monitoring point that watched for threats from deep space. The awakening process had changed her. Elena could perceive dimensions of space that had been invisible before, sense the flow of energy through the galactic web, and understand technologies that would have seemed like magic to her former self. She was becoming what humanity had once been. But she was also still human enough to feel afraid. The first awakening node was hidden beneath the station's lower levels, disguised as a power generation facility. Elena made her way through the familiar corridors, but now she could see the true purpose behind the station's design. Every corridor, every room, every system had been carefully planned to support the node's function. She reached the power facility and found the hidden entrance exactly where the crystal archives had indicated. A simple touch of her hand against what appeared to be a blank wall, and a doorway appeared, revealing a passage that led deep into the station's core. The node chamber was smaller than the archives on Earth, but far more complex. Crystalline structures filled the room, connected by streams of energy that formed intricate patterns in the air. At the center stood a control pedestal that seemed to be waiting for her. Elena approached carefully and placed her hands on the control surface. The node responded immediately, connecting her consciousness to the local network of monitoring stations. What she saw through the network's sensors made her blood run cold. The Devourers were moving faster than the archives had predicted. Dark shapes that existed partially outside normal space were already consuming star systems at the galaxy's rim. Entire civilizations were disappearing, not just destroyed, but erased so completely that no one remembered they had ever existed. Worse, the younger species had no idea what was happening. When a system vanished, the galactic community simply forgot it had ever been there. Records were altered automatically, memories were edited, and history rewrote itself to fill the gaps. Only the ancient monitoring stations remembered the truth. Faithfully recording each loss, even as the rest of the galaxy forgot, Elena activated the node, sending out the first pulse of awakening energy. Across the local region of space, humans would begin having dreams about their true nature. The process would be gradual, designed to avoid panic or mental breakdown, but it would accelerate as more nodes came online. She felt the pulse spread outward like ripples in a pond, touching human minds on dozens of worlds. On New Terra, a farmer looked up at the stars and suddenly understood that he was descended from beings who had built those very constellations. On mining station Gamma 7, a technician touched a piece of equipment and instinctively knew how to improve its efficiency by factors of 10. But the awakening came with a price. As humans began to remember their true nature, they also became visible to the Devourers. The ancient enemy had learned to hunt by following traces of the power that humanity had once wielded. Elena felt a chill of recognition as the node's sensors detected something new, a dark presence at the edge of the system, moving toward Kepler Station with purposeful intent. The Devourers had found her. Elena worked quickly to complete the node's activation sequence. The awakening pulse needed to reach full strength before she could move to the next location. But the dark presence was approaching rapidly, and she could sense its hunger for the energy she was channeling. Through the station's external sensors, Elena caught her first glimpse of a devourer. It wasn't really visible in normal space, more like a distortion that hurt to look at directly. Space bent around it in impossible ways, and stars dimmed as it passed. Where it touched the station's outer hull, metal and composites simply ceased to exist, leaving gaps that folded in on themselves. Alarms began sounding throughout the station, as systems failed for no apparent reason. But Elena could see the truth. The Devourer was consuming the station's reality bit by bit, working its way toward the core where she stood. She had minutes at most before it reached the node chamber. Elena made a desperate decision. Instead of fleeing, she opened herself fully to the node's power, drawing on abilities that she barely understood. Energy flowed through her body as she became a conduit for the ancient systems that still protected the galaxy. The node responded to her will, transforming from a gradual awakening beacon into a weapon of focused intent. Elena directed that power at the approaching Devourer, not trying to destroy it. That was impossible with conventional weapons, but attempting something else. She tried to make it remember what it had consumed. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Devourer stopped its advance and began writhing in what might have been pain. The stars it had dimmed flared back to life, and the gaps in the station's hull began to fill with regenerated matter. For a moment, Elena thought she had won. But then the Devourer adapted, learning from her attack. It began to consume the very memory of what it had taken, making her weapon useless. Elena realized she was outmatched. She wasn't ready for direct confrontation with these entities. Not yet. She triggered the node's emergency protocol, sending out a powerful burst of awakening energy that would accelerate the process across the entire sector. Thousands of humans would remember their heritage in the next few hours, instead of the next few weeks. Then she ran. Elena's ship launched from Kepler Station just as the Devourer reached the node chamber. She watched through her rear sensors as the station simply stopped being. Not destroyed, not damaged. It just wasn't there anymore, as if it had never existed. But the node had done its work. Elena could feel the awakening spreading across human space like wildfire. On world after world, humans were remembering who they really were. Her next destination was New Geneva on Earth, where she needed to consult with the other team members, who had begun activating their assigned nodes. But when Elena emerged from hyperspace in Earth's system, she found chaos waiting for her. Ships from a dozen different species were converging on Earth, their crews confused and frightened by the memories that were suddenly surfacing in their genetic programming. The Vorac remembered being taught consciousness by mysterious beings. The Luminari recalled lessons in energy manipulation. The Tessarians found themselves possessed of knowledge about trade routes that shouldn't have existed. All of them were heading to Earth, driven by instincts they didn't understand. Elena landed at the Institute to find Dr. Chen and the others already waiting for her. But they weren't alone. Ambassador Kethavar of the Vorac was there, along with representatives from half a dozen other species. "Dr. Vasquez," Kethavar said, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. "What have you done to us?" Elena looked around the room, seeing fear and confusion in alien faces that had never before shown such vulnerability. "I've reminded you of the truth," she replied. "All of you." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Elena, we've been getting reports from across human space. The awakening is happening faster than we planned. Some people are having mental breakdowns from the sudden return of memories. Others are manifesting abilities they can't control." Elena nodded grimly. "The Devourers forced my hand. They found the first node. We don't have time for a gradual awakening anymore." She turned to the alien representatives. "You all remember fragments now, don't you? Memories that don't match your official histories. Knowledge that came from somewhere else." The Luminari representative, a being of contained energy named Bright Thought Ascending, spoke through its translation device. We remember teachers, beings who showed us how to think, how to exist. The memories feel real, but they contradict everything we know about our evolution. Because your official histories are wrong, Elena said bluntly. You didn't evolve naturally. Humans guided your development millions of years ago, before we chose to forget our own nature. She activated a portable holographic display showing images from the Earth archives. The alien representatives watched in stunned silence as their true origins were revealed. This is impossible, a Tessarian diplomat said. Humans are barely a few thousand years old. You have no advanced technology, no evidence of ancient civilization. Elena smiled sadly. We hid it all. We had to save the galaxy from an enemy that's returning even as we speak. She showed them the records of the Devourers, explaining the threat that was already consuming systems at the galaxy's edge. The alien representatives grew more agitated as they realized the scope of the danger. You're saying that an enemy capable of erasing entire star systems is coming here, and our only hope is that humans will remember how to be gods? Kethavar asked skeptically. Not gods, Elena corrected. Guardians. We were never rulers or conquerors. We were protectors, and we gave up everything to keep you safe. Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic star chart. The monitoring stations are tracking the Devourers' advance. At current speed, they'll reach the inner systems within 30 years. We need to complete the awakening process and prepare defenses. Elena studied the chart, noting which systems had already vanished from existence. The pattern was clear. The Devourers were following the old human expansion routes, consuming the hidden infrastructure that had once supported the galactic web. They remember us, too, Elena realized. They're targeting our old systems first, trying to prevent the awakening. A new voice interrupted the discussion. Then we'd better give them something to really worry about. Everyone turned to see a woman standing in the doorway. But there was something different about her. She moved with impossible grace, and her eyes held depths that seemed to extend beyond normal space. Who are you? Elena asked. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, New Terra Colonial Marines, the woman replied. At least that's who I was this morning. Now I remember being Admiral Sarah Rodriguez of the Galactic Defense Fleet, 3rd Stellar War. Elena stared in amazement. You're one of the ancient humans, a full awakening. Sarah nodded. The node activation on New Terra triggered something in me, probably because I was already in the military, already thinking in terms of defense and protection. The memories came back all at once. She moved to the holographic display, her fingers dancing over controls that hadn't been visible moments before. The star chart expanded, showing details that no current technology should have been able to detect. The Devourers are using the same attack pattern they used 3 million years ago, Sarah explained. They probe the defenses, consume isolated systems, and gradually work their way toward population centers. But they have a weakness. What kind of weakness? Kethavar asked. Sarah's smile was predatory. They can only consume what exists in normal space-time. The web we built operates in 11 dimensions simultaneously. If we can reactivate the full network, we can create zones where reality is so heavily reinforced that even the Devourers can't unmake it. Elena felt hope stirring for the first time since the crisis began. How many more awakened humans do we need? For full web activation? At least 10,000 with complete memory restoration, Sarah replied. For basic defense? Maybe 1,000 would be enough to hold key systems. Dr. Chen frowned. The awakening process is accelerating, but it's still random. We can't control who remembers what or how quickly. Sarah touched the display again, bringing up files that Elena hadn't known existed. Actually, we can. There are forced awakening protocols, but they're dangerous. The subject has to be willing, and the process can cause permanent psychological damage if done incorrectly. Elena looked around the room, seeing the weight of decision settling on everyone present. They were talking about fundamentally changing human nature, about forcing people to become something beyond normal humanity. "The alternative is extinction," Sarah said quietly. "Not just for us, but for everyone. The Devourers won't stop with this galaxy. They'll keep consuming until there's nothing left but empty void." Ambassador Kethavar spoke up. "The Vorac Council will support whatever action you deem necessary. We remember enough now to know that we owe our existence to humanity." Similar declarations came from the other alien representatives. Species that had considered humans primitive were now pledging their resources to support humanity's return to power. Elena realized that the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. Humanity was waking up from millions of years of sleep, and when they fully remembered who they were, nothing would ever be the same. "Sarah," Elena said, "how long do we have before the Devourers reach inhabited systems?" Sarah's expression grew grim. "The outer colonies are already under attack. We just don't know it yet because the systems that would report it have been erased from existence. I estimate 6 months before they reach a major population center. 6 months to wake up a species that had been sleeping for 3 million years. Elena looked at the faces around her, human and alien alike, all depending on humanity to remember how to save the galaxy. The real war was about to begin. The awakening spread like wildfire across human space. Within 3 months, nearly 50,000 humans had recovered partial memories of their ancient heritage. 1,000 had achieved full awakening, becoming beings of such power that they barely resembled the species they had been. Elena stood in the command center that had emerged from beneath New Geneva when the final awakening protocols activated. The chamber was vast, its walls covered with displays showing the status of defensive systems across the galaxy. At the center stood a crystalline matrix that pulsed with energy from 11 dimensions simultaneously. "Status report," she called, to Sarah Rodriguez, who now served as military coordinator for the awakening forces. "The web is 30% operational," Sarah replied, her consciousness partially extended into the Galactic Defense Network. "We've managed to reinforce reality around 200 star systems, creating safe zones that the Devourers can't penetrate." Elena nodded, but her expression remained grim. 30% wasn't enough. The Devourers had reached the middle rim of the galaxy, consuming entire sectors before anyone realized they were under attack. Billions of beings were simply ceasing to exist, erased so completely that only the ancient monitoring stations remembered they had ever lived. Dr. Chen approached from another control station. "Elena, we're getting reports from the awakened humans, on the front lines. The Devourers are adapting faster than we expected. They're learning to counter our reality reinforcement fields." "Show me," Elena said. The main display shifted to show real-time images from the Rigel sector, where a group of awakened humans were attempting to protect a cluster of inhabited systems. Elena watched in horror as the Devourers deployed new tactics, sending out waves of unreality that eroded the reinforcement fields like acid eating through metal. 3 star systems winked out of existence as she watched. "They're not just consuming reality anymore," Sarah said, her voice tight with concentration. "They're learning to think like us, to anticipate our strategies." Elena realized they were facing the same problem that had forced the original humans to sacrifice their civilization. The Devourers were too adaptable, too intelligent. Every weapon humanity developed, every defense they created, the enemy learned to counter. A new voice joined the discussion. "Maybe it's time we stopped thinking, like the old humans." Elena turned to see a young man she didn't recognize. He wore the simple clothes of a farmer, but his eyes held the depth of someone who had lived for millennia. "Who are you?" she asked. "Marcus Thompson from Agricultural Station Beta 7, he replied. "At least, that's who I was until yesterday. My awakening was different from the others. Sarah studied him with her enhanced senses. You're not showing the same power signatures as the other awakened humans. What happened to you? Marcus smiled sadly. I remembered being one of the humans who designed the long sleep. I know why we really did it, and it wasn't just to hide from the Devourers. Elena felt a chill of premonition. What do you mean? The war was changing us, Marcus explained. To fight entities that existed outside normal reality, we had to become something like them. With each battle, we became more alien, more disconnected from the universe we were trying to protect. He gestured toward the awakened humans working at various stations around the command center. Look at them. Really look at them. Are they still human? Elena followed his gaze and understood what he meant. The fully awakened humans moved with unnatural grace, their eyes reflecting dimensions that normal vision couldn't perceive. They spoke in languages that existed in mathematical space and manipulated matter with casual thoughts. They were becoming gods, and gods couldn't relate to the mortal species they were supposed to protect. The original humans realized this, Marcus continued. They knew that if the war continued, humanity would win, but become something that the galaxy would need protection from, so they chose a different path. The long sleep wasn't just about hiding, Elena breathed. It was about preserving humanity's essential nature. Marcus nodded. Every few million years, we wake up to face the Devourers. We fight them using the old methods, push them back to the void between galaxies, then sleep again before we can become monsters ourselves. Sarah's expression grew troubled. But that means we're fighting a war we can never truly win. The Devourers will always come back. Not necessarily, Marcus said. Each cycle, we learn something new. The collective knowledge of every previous war is stored in the archives. This time, we might have enough understanding to find a permanent solution. Elena felt the weight of cosmic history pressing down on her. Humanity wasn't just fighting for the current galaxy. They were part of a conflict that spanned eons, an eternal struggle between creation and entropy. What do you propose? She asked. Marcus moved to the central control matrix. Instead of trying to become powerful enough to destroy the Devourers, we need to understand what they really are. The archives contain data from battles across multiple galaxies and millions of years. There might be a pattern we haven't seen before. Elena authorized access to the deepest levels of the ancient archives. As the data flowed through the command center's systems, patterns began to emerge that no single generation of humans had been able to perceive. The Devourers weren't just random entities from the void between galaxies. They were part of something larger, a cosmic process that seemed to occur whenever a galaxy reached a certain level of complexity and consciousness. They're not invaders, Elena realized with growing amazement. They're antibodies. Marcus nodded grimly. The universe has an immune system, just like a living body. When consciousness becomes too concentrated in one region, when intelligent life grows too powerful, the system responds by sending entities to restore balance. By erasing everything, Sarah said bitterly. Not everything, Elena corrected, studying the data more carefully. Look at the pattern. They target the most advanced civilizations first, the ones with the greatest ability to manipulate reality. They leave primitive life alone. Dr. Chen joined them at the control matrix. So humanity's cycle of advancement and regression isn't just a tactic to preserve our essential nature. It's a way of staying below the threshold that triggers the cosmic immune response. Elena felt pieces of an enormous puzzle clicking into place. That's why the original humans scattered the younger species across the galaxy instead of keeping them concentrated in one region. That's why they designed the galactic web to be distributed instead of centralized. They were trying to create a stable configuration that wouldn't trigger another immune response. But something went wrong, Marcus said. The system is more sensitive now than it was before. The threshold for triggering a response has dropped. Sarah pulled up tactical displays showing the Devourers' advance. They're targeting our awakened, humans specifically. The more power we manifest, the more aggressively they respond. Elena stared at the displays, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. We can't win this war by becoming more powerful. Every time we escalate, they escalate to match us. We're trapped in an arms race against the universe itself. Then what's the solution? Dr. Chen asked. Elena looked around the command center, seeing the awakened humans who had sacrificed their normal existence to become weapons in an impossible war. She thought about the billions of beings who had already been erased from existence, and the billions more who would follow if they couldn't find another way. We have to stop being weapons, she said finally. We have to remember what we were, really meant to be. Marcus smiled. Gardeners. Elena nodded and turned to Sarah. How quickly can you recall the awakened forces from the front lines? Elena, if we withdraw our defenses, entire sectors will be consumed, Sarah protested. Not if we do this right, Elena replied. The Devourers are targeting concentrations of power. If we disperse that power, spread it out across the galaxy, in a way that looks like natural development instead of organized resistance, they might stop seeing us as a threat. She began entering commands into the control matrix, accessing protocols that had been hidden even from the awakened humans. The web was never supposed to be a weapon. It was a life support system, a way of nurturing and protecting younger species, without dominating them. The central chamber filled with holographic displays showing a new configuration for the Galactic Defense Network. Instead of concentrated fortress worlds and massive energy weapons, it showed millions of small nodes scattered across every inhabited system, each one designed to look like natural phenomena. Distributed consciousness, Elena explained. Instead of a few thousand humans with godlike power, we spread that same power across millions of normal humans who retain their essential humanity. Each person becomes a tiny part of the web's function, but no single individual becomes powerful enough to trigger an immune response. Marcus studied the plans with growing excitement. It's brilliant. The galaxy becomes subtly protected, but from the universe's perspective, it looks like normal evolutionary development. Sarah looked skeptical. What about the Devourers that are already here? They won't just go away because we change our strategy. Elena smiled grimly. No, but they will if we give them what they're really looking for. She activated a new set of protocols, ones that had been locked away since the first war against the Devourers. The awakened humans throughout the galaxy suddenly felt their expanded consciousness being drawn back into normal human parameters. Elena, what are you doing? Sarah asked in alarm. I'm giving them a target they can't resist, Elena replied. Myself. Elena began channeling power from across the entire web, drawing the collective consciousness of millions of years of human civilization into her own mind. She was becoming exactly what the universe's immune system was designed to eliminate, a single being with the power to reshape reality. The effect was immediate. Across the galaxy, the Devourers stopped their advance and began converging on Earth, drawn by the massive concentration of power that Elena represented. This is suicide, Dr. Chen protested. No, Elena said, her voice now carrying harmonics from multiple dimensions. This is evolution. As the Devourers approached Earth, Elena felt her consciousness expanding beyond anything the ancient humans had achieved. She could perceive the cosmic forces that had created the universe's immune system, understand the delicate balance between order and chaos that kept reality stable. The Devourers arrived in Earth's system like a tide of unreality, ready to consume the concentration of power that threatened cosmic balance. But when they reached Elena, they found something unexpected. Instead of fighting them, she welcomed them. Elena opened her expanded consciousness to the Devourers, showing them what humanity had learned over millions of years of conflict. She demonstrated how consciousness could be distributed instead of concentrated, how intelligence could grow without disrupting cosmic balance, how the universe could be gardened instead of conquered. For a moment that lasted eternity, Elena existed simultaneously as human and devourer, creation and entropy, order and chaos. In that impossible state, she understood the true purpose of the cosmic cycle. The universe wasn't trying to destroy consciousness. It was trying to teach it how to exist in harmony with cosmic law. When the moment ended, the Devourers began to withdraw, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Elena had shown them a path forward that didn't require the destruction of everything they encountered. Elena collapsed, her consciousness returning to human parameters, but the damage was done. She had become something beyond normal human existence, and the universe's immune system would continue to see her as a threat. "Elena," Sarah said, catching her as she fell. Elena smiled weakly. "It's okay. I know what I have to do." She activated the final protocol, the one that would scatter her expanded consciousness across the entire human species, distributing her power so thinly that no individual would trigger another immune response. Humanity would retain their awakened abilities, but in such subtle forms that they would appear to be natural evolution. As Elena's consciousness dissolved into the collective human experience, she felt a deep satisfaction. The war was over, not because humanity had won, but because they had learned to stop fighting. Across the galaxy, humans settled into their new role as invisible guardians. They guided younger species with gentle suggestions instead of direct intervention. They maintained the web through unconscious cooperation instead of centralized control. They protected the galaxy by becoming indistinguishable from its natural processes. The older alien species gradually forgot that there had ever been a crisis. Their genetic memories retained only a vague sense that humans were somehow special, somehow important, but they couldn't remember why. Earth returned to appearing like a simple agricultural world, its true nature hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained illusion. The command centers and ancient archives faded back into legend, waiting for the next time they might be needed. Dr. Chen stood in what had once been the central command chamber, now looking like an ordinary basement storage room. He held a small crystal that contained Elena's final message. "The garden grows best when the gardener is invisible," her recorded voice said. "Humanity's greatest strength was never our power. It was our willingness to give up that power when it was no longer needed." Chen smiled and carefully placed the crystal in a storage container marked with symbols that looked like random scratches to anyone who didn't know better. Future archaeologists might find it someday, when humanity needed to remember who they really were. But for now, the galaxy was safe, protected by guardians who had learned the ultimate lesson of power. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when not to fight. In the depths of space, reality hummed with subtle harmonies that no one noticed. The web operated perfectly, maintained by millions of humans who thought they were just living ordinary lives. Children played games that unknowingly reinforced cosmic stability. Farmers planted crops in patterns that strengthened the barriers between dimensions. Traders followed routes that kept the galactic economy in perfect balance. Humanity had become exactly what they were always meant to be, the silent guardians of a universe that would never know how close it had come to ending. And in the spaces between galaxies, entities that had once been devourers began their own transformation, learning to nurture instead of consume, to garden the vast cosmic wilderness instead of erasing it. The universe had found its balance at last.